Hiring managers. What was your most WTF is wrong with this person moment you've had during an interview? Story 1. I was doing a video interview with a job candidate. They were clearly in a large room, maybe a bedroom, and most of it was visible behind them. It looked neat and tidy, so I didn't think anything of it. In the back right corner, there was a closed door. About 7 minutes into the interview, I saw the door open just a little and a guy peeked his head in. He noticed the person was in an interview, then gently closed the door. No big deal. That kind of thing happens. I asked my next question and let the candidate answer. But then, around 30 seconds later, the door slowly opened again. This time, the guy started crawling on the floor, trying to get across the room. I guess he thought he was out of the camera's view, but he was definitely visible. He reached the other side of the room and started messing with something. With his back to the camera, let's just say it wasn't the best angle. After he finished, he crawled back and left through the door. I probably should have stopped the interview and let her handle the situation, but it was just so funny I had to see how it ended. I was trying hard not to laugh, but once the interview was done, I couldn't hold it in. She ended up getting the job, and from what I remember, she did a great job. Story 2. I helped set up an interview for a friend's nephew with a company that was hiring about 30 college students for summer work. His college major matched well with what the company did, and I knew the hiring manager personally, so it felt like a perfect opportunity. A couple of weeks later, my friend reached out and asked if there was any news about the job. So I messaged my hiring manager friend, and the conversation went something like this. Me, hey, how did the round of interviews go? HR, great. We needed to fill 30 spots and only had to do 31 interviews to get them all filled. Me, nice. Was Paul the 10th one of the people you hired? HR, oh him, yeah, about that. He didn't get the job because, well, he wasn't wearing any clothes during the interview. Me, wait, are you serious? I can't believe he would show up like that. HR, it was a video call. When we turned on his camera, he was lying in bed without anything on. Me, maybe he thought it was just an audio call. HR, we told him we could see him, and he just said sorry and pulled a sheet over himself. We offered to reschedule, but he said it was fine and wanted to keep going. So, we decided to move on to other candidates. Story 3. I was hiring a business intelligence analyst. There are lots of ways to get into this kind of work, and I'm usually open-minded. Honestly, if someone is smart and knows even basic SQL, I can usually teach the rest. But lately, I've had to be more careful because our projects are getting more complex. This one woman, probably in her mid-40s, had a loud and confident personality. At first, she seemed like she might be a good fit for the team. But the problem was, she kept stretching the truth, and not even in a convincing way. I asked her, "Do you know SQL?" She said, "Oh yes, I've used it for years." So I showed her some simple code and said, "This is the kind of thing we work with." Her response, "What's this?" But the thing that really stuck with me was something she said completely out of the blue. I told her not to take a certain route to the train station because it was dark and could be unsafe. Also, I was going that way myself and didn't really want to walk with her. She replied, "It's okay, I have a black belt and trained in martial arts for years." I said, "Oh cool, which style?" Her answer, "I don't remember." Come on. Story 4. I once interviewed a woman for an admin job at a law firm. While we were talking, I was looking over her resume. And just to be clear, English was her first language, which is why this part really stood out to me. Her mission statement said, "Along with my detail-oriented and organizational skills, I will encourage team to work cooperatively and creativity to provide an understanding the visual aspects of our work." I read that sentence about 5 or 6 times, thinking maybe I was the one not getting it. Honestly, I started to wonder if I was having some kind of medical issue. I completely lost track of what she was saying during the interview because my brain was so stuck on that sentence. I still don't know what the visual aspects of our work were supposed to mean in the context of working at a law firm. To this day, I've never figured it out. I actually cut that sentence out of her resume and kept it on my desk, and it's been sitting there for over 15 years. Story 5. She got emotional 3 different times during the interview while talking about how much she disliked her current job. One of my coworkers even had to get up and bring her a box of tissues. Once she calmed down a bit, she let us know that she would need a special desk chair because of an injury she got at her current job. She also mentioned she had a legal case going on with that job and was hoping to get a big payout from it. No one had said anything about offering her the position. She just seemed to assume she had it already. What really made it awkward was that she was applying for a role related to workplace injury claims at a law firm that only helps employers, not employees. While that doesn't affect whether we hire someone or not, it was strange for her to talk so much about her own case against her boss during the interview. That and the crying. Edit. I know a fair bit about employment and workplace injury law. She wasn't passed over because she had a legal case. It was the fact that she broke down 3 times during the interview that made us decide not to call her back. I honestly felt bad for her, but you just can't do that in a professional interview. Story 6. I did a phone interview with a guy who seemed really friendly and excited about the job. He was pretty new to the field, but we were open to giving him a chance. I invited him to come in for an in-person interview. When he arrived, my manager and I were there to meet him. As soon as I called him in, he gave me a big hug and started talking to me like we were best friends. As a 27-year-old woman, I felt very uncomfortable and didn't know how to react. At the end of the interview, we told him we'd get back to him in a couple of weeks to let him know our decision. After he left, my manager asked if I knew the guy. I said definitely not. His interview didn't go well either. He just wasn't the right fit for the role. My manager was the one who called him later to let him know he didn't get the job. But things got weird. He started calling my phone every day that week and left long voice messages. Sometimes he asked about the interview, but other times he'd say things like, "Hey, how's it going?" I was thinking, if I get the job, maybe we could hang out. It made me really uneasy, so I asked my manager to let him know earlier than planned that he didn't get the position. But even after that, the calls didn't stop. I just started deleting the voicemails without listening to them. My manager and I were so concerned about how often he was calling that we spoke to HR. Whatever they did must have worked, because the calls finally stopped. Story 7. I once gave a candidate a case study during an interview. Before we started, I explained everything clearly. I said, "Look, this case is meant to see how you think through a problem. I won't give you all the details right away. You'll need to ask questions to get more information. The final answer matters, but what matters more is how you approach the problem and break it down. This could take 15 to 30 minutes. The candidate listened to the 30-second intro of the case study, which, as promised, didn't include enough information to solve it, and immediately responded with, "I think the answer is X." I asked, "Why do you think that?" She replied, "It's just what my gut tells me." I asked if she could explain how she came to that answer, maybe with numbers or logic. But again, she said it was just her intuition. At that point, I set my pen down, leaned back in my chair, and started thinking about how to politely wrap up the interview early. Edit. A few people asked if her answer was correct. No, not even close. But even if she had guessed right, it would have just been luck, not skill. She didn't have enough details to make a real estimate. The intro was something like, "You need to figure out how much value a group of service professionals is bringing in. What's the gross margin they're producing, and how does how busy they are affect that number?" Without asking questions like, "How are we defining gross margin?" or "What does utilization mean in this context?" you can't begin to solve the case. She just threw out a number without asking anything. To anyone preparing for interviews like this, take what the interviewer says seriously. If they tell you the process is more important than the final answer, they mean it. Ask questions, think things through. Don't try to read minds. A good workplace values clear communication, not guessing games. Story 8. We had a candidate visit our campus for a final round of interviews. This type of visit is pretty involved. It usually includes a meeting with the dean, a long interview with the full hiring committee, a formal meeting with the department chair, dinner with the committee, a 1-hour academic presentation called a job talk, teaching a sample undergrad class, meeting with students, and a campus tour. During his job talk, something strange happened. He kept showing off the shiny pink lining of his suit jacket, but oddly, only in the direction of one of our graduate students, who is openly gay. Everyone in the room noticed, and it came off as awkward and inappropriate. Later that day, we had a social event at a local bar so the candidate could meet some of the students. Unfortunately, he drank too much and started talking about all the drama happening in his current department. Then, he began sharing personal details about a complicated relationship he was having with a student at his current school. which is something you're definitely not supposed to bring up in a job interview setting. But the final red flag came the next morning. One of our grad students, a female student who had already volunteered and was being paid to do so, was assigned to drive him back to the airport. Instead of going with the plan, the candidate kept trying to convince the openly gay student to take her place, even though it was clearly already arranged. That was the last straw. He did not receive a job offer. Story 9. I used to work at a pizza place. One day, an older woman walked in and asked to speak to the manager. Our general manager, GM, was there, so I got him, thinking she might be asking about a job. She started off with, "Are you still hiring?" GM said, "Yes, ma'am." She followed up with, "How long do you usually take to go through applications?" He replied, "About a week or two." Then her tone changed completely. "Well, that's strange, because I applied a month ago and haven't heard anything." At this point, the GM was clearly surprised by how quickly her mood shifted. He said, "Well, we just cleaned out the office, so it's possible your application got lost. If you'd like, you can fill out another one, and..." She cut him off. "No." He looked confused. "No." She repeated, "No. I want you to go find my original application." Now I could see my GM trying to figure out how to handle this. She was acting like a customer who's upset, but she was actually someone trying to get hired. He wasn't sure whether to respond with the polite customer tone or the firm boss tone. Then it clicked. He asked, "And what's your availability?" She answered, "Mornings." He smiled and said, "Ah, that's unfortunate. We're actually full on morning shifts right now." We weren't. "You might want to try the Domino's across the street. Take care." Story 10. I wasn't the one doing the interview. I was the person being interviewed. I wasn't feeling great that morning, but I had an interview for a really cool job at a science museum as a promotions event coordinator. It honestly seemed like a dream job, so I decided to go anyway. As I drove there, I felt worse and worse. By the time I walked into the museum, I knew I probably shouldn't have come, but I tried to push through. They asked me to sit and wait for the hiring manager. When she came out to meet me, I stood up and followed her as she walked me across the museum and up 2 flights of stairs. It felt like it was 120 degrees in that building. Just as we were about to go into her office, she had her hand on the door handle. My body gave up. I quickly leaned over and made it to a trash can nearby, and I got sick right there. It lasted a solid 2 minutes, with even a few moments of dry heaving. When I was finally done, I looked up and saw her standing with her back to me, holding her head in her hands like she was trying to stay calm. I apologized, told her I hoped her day went better than mine, and walked out. That job would have been so fun. Story 11. I'm not a hiring manager, but I've been with the company long enough that they sometimes let me run interviews for new delivery drivers. One day, a guy came in to ask for an application. Something about him seemed a little off, but we gave him one anyway. He came back the next day with it filled out, but just barely. Then he kept asking, "So when's my interview?" We told him we'd call once we figured it out. But when he didn't hear from us, he started calling the store every day, asking when he could come in. Eventually, the team asked me to sit down with him and let him know that we weren't hiring right now, but we'd reach out if anything changed. So I waited at a booth in the store for him to show up. Then I looked out the window and saw him getting out of his car, wearing our company uniform. Here's the thing, we only give people the uniform on their first day. He hadn't even had an interview yet. He came in, sat down across from me, and we exchanged some small talk. Then he asked me if I liked his uniform. I said it looked fine and asked who gave it to him. He told me he made it himself. I asked why he would make a uniform when we give those out, and he said it was because we hadn't given him one. After that, his mood changed and he started acting rude. I guess the question upset him. I told him what I had been asked to say, that we weren't hiring at the moment and we'd reach out if things changed. On top of that, he also said his car only worked 2 days a week, but he still wanted full-time hours. That alone made it clear he wasn't a good fit for the job. Overall, it was one of the more unusual interview experiences I've had. Story 12. I have 2 stories. First one happened back in college. We were interviewing people for a spot on the school newspaper. One of the questions was, "This job needs someone who's energetic, curious, and not afraid to talk to people to find the real story. How would you describe yourself?" The person just said, "Fun." We asked if they could explain that a little more. They said, no, they didn't get the job. Second story happened later in my career during hiring for an IT position. Someone applied who had been let go from another office in a government agency. But his resume told a very different story. Instead of saying he had been fired for not being able to do the core parts of his job, he wrote that he had been let go when the project ended, even though the dates on his resume were 3 years off from when he actually left. To make things worse, all the big achievements he listed were actually things my co-workers or I had done. He wasn't involved in any of them. What he didn't realize was that we had joined with another region, and now we were on the hiring panel. I have no idea how he thought this would work. Same agency, same people. Of course we noticed. Story 13. This story is kind of the opposite of most. It's about a time I completely threw off someone I was interviewing. When I do interviews, I like to mix in a couple of fun or unexpected questions, just to see how someone might fit with the team. Nothing too serious, just something casual to break the ice. We were talking to a young guy fresh out of school, trying to get his first IT job. I said, "So, we're all a little nerdy around here and like chatting about comics. There's one thing we all agree on, Marvel or DC." I thought it was obvious I was joking, based on my tone and the way I said it. But the poor guy froze. He didn't know what to say. He stammered a little, completely unsure how to respond. I quickly told him, "Hey, I'm just joking, don't worry about it." But it definitely shook him. It threw him off for the rest of the interview. It was like his brain hit a wall. We still ended up hiring him, and I'm so glad we did. He's been amazing. Now we both laugh about that moment. He even told me later, "Man, I didn't know what to think. You guys were asking all these serious IT questions, then suddenly you're like, comics." And I'm just sitting there thinking, what? I don't even know where to start. Story 14. I once interviewed someone for an intermediate level analyst position, and during the interview, he started bragging about things that were surprising, to say the least. He told me that at his last job, he worked 2 extra jobs while still on the clock for his main office job. For example, for about 2 weeks, before getting caught and let go from both jobs, he would take really long lunch breaks. No one knew where he was from 10:30 to 1:30. Turns out, he had picked up a job making pizzas at the restaurant next door and worked the lunch shift there. He also proudly shared that he used to play online poker during work hours. This was back in the late 2000s when online poker was very popular. He talked about all of this like he expected me to be impressed. Maybe he thought I'd think he was clever, or that it showed he could multitask. I really don't know. But what I do know is that we didn't offer him the job. Story 15. Right from the start, the candidate seemed a little off. He made a lot of big claims, like saying he had built apps for companies, but when we asked simple questions, like naming a programming language or explaining what DHCP or DNS are, he couldn't answer. It was clear things weren't going well, so I decided to keep the rest of the interview light with some casual questions. I asked why he had moved from California to our state. That's when things got strange. It was like he had a whole speech prepared. He started going off about how people in California didn't agree with his views, and said that's why he left. He went on and on about how glad he was to be around people who think like him, assuming we all shared the same views, which was a big assumption. Once the interview ended, I sent him to the front desk to turn in his visitor badge. About 10 minutes later, I got a direct call from our CFO. Her exact words were, "You will not hire that man." Turns out, the front desk was empty, so instead of waiting, he wandered into her office. She was in the middle of a phone call, and he stood silently in her doorway, staring at her for 5 minutes straight. Oh, and here's the kicker. Our state is one of the most progressive in the country. We haven't had a conservative governor since the 1970s, and we were the first state to legalize recreational cannabis. So yeah, he definitely read the room wrong. Story 16. Like many others here, I'm not a hiring manager, but part of my job as a training specialist involved doing interviews from time to time. We were hiring for an entry-level payroll consultant at a call center. It wasn't a difficult role, 6 weeks of training and a laid-back, business casual environment. My last interview of the day was scheduled for 2 p.m. 2 o'clock came and went. No one showed up. I didn't have anything urgent going on, so I decided to wait a little longer. But since I hadn't gotten a call or email saying he'd be late, his chances were already pretty slim. At 2:15, a minivan pulled up in front of the building. A very large guy got out from the passenger side. He was wearing flip-flops, basketball shorts, and a Godzilla t-shirt. The minivan drove off. He walked in and said he was there for his 2 o'clock interview, without mentioning he was late. By that point, I'd already decided he wasn't getting the job. He didn't bring a resume, he wasn't dressed for an interview, and he didn't show up on time. I politely told him all of this. He shrugged and said something like, "My mom just wanted me to get a job instead of staying at home." Then he asked if he could hang out in our break room because he had friends who worked there and heard we had a Nintendo Switch. I told him that we're a secure site, so he couldn't go past the lobby, but he was welcome to wait there if needed. We'd had plenty of people wait for rides before, so this wasn't unusual. He mumbled something like, "That's dumb, whatever," and I just let it go. I badged through the doors and went back to work. About 20 minutes later, I got a message. Security had to ask him to leave because he was making the receptionist uncomfortable by talking about politics. From that day on, we changed the rules. No more waiting in the lobby, and we stopped showing the news on the lobby TV. Story 17. We had a woman apply for a security guard position. Even before the interview, she called our office about 3 times asking for the address. She kept forgetting where we were located. It was a bit unusual, but we gave her the benefit of the doubt. The interview itself wasn't bad. She was probably in her 60s, seemed physically healthy, and although she spoke slowly, it was clear she really wanted the job and wasn't lacking intelligence. But once training started, things took a turn. She was completely lost during the entire class. She kept interrupting the instructor, seemed confused during the tests, and would sometimes look around the room or talk quietly to herself. It was clear she wasn't following along. Eventually, my manager had to make the decision to let her go, right in the middle of training. When she was told, she started crying and didn't want to leave. In the end, someone had to walk her out of the building. What's even more heartbreaking is that she still applies from time to time. She'll call and ask where our office is, not seeming to remember that she already went through the process once. We've had to add a note to her profile to make sure she isn't scheduled for another interview. It's a really sad situation, and I genuinely hope she finds the support she needs. Story 18. I asked a job candidate the usual question. Tell me about a time you had to get creative to solve a problem. He proudly told me a story from when he worked at the Chick-fil-A inside the student union. He said he was opening the store one morning and noticed something was wrong when he turned on the fryer. He could smell what he believed was a gas leak. His manager wouldn't be in for another hour, so instead of waiting or calling for help, he decided to fix it himself. He took some rubber gloves meant for food prep and used them to create a temporary seal where the leak was. Then he opened the store and started serving customers. When the manager finally arrived, they immediately shut everything down, used the emergency shutoff, and called the gas company and fire department. The candidate was smiling as he told me how proud he was for keeping the store running until the manager showed up. I did not hire him. Story 19. I was part of the interview panel for a forensic technician job, kind of like a real-life version of a crime scene investigator. The interview included a few standard questions, and then we'd show the applicant a photo from an actual scene. Their task was to write down everything they noticed and explain what they thought was important. Before starting, we always explained the full process and the job duties, giving applicants a chance to ask questions or let us know if they had any concerns. One day, we had an applicant who looked qualified on paper. Her application made it clear she understood what the role involved. We gave her the usual rundown before starting, and she said she understood and was ready. But when we got to the part with the photo, everything changed. The photo was from a case involving a man who had passed away from a drug-related incident. There was no visible blood, just a bit of vomit, and his face wasn't fully shown. Compared to many cases, it wasn't graphic. She looked at the photo and immediately became upset. She asked, "Is this real?" We said yes. It was from a case our team had worked on. She dropped the photo on the table and said it was disgusting and asked how we could show her something like that. We gently reminded her this was part of the job. She had to be comfortable with real scenes. She responded, "I didn't think I'd actually see anything like that. It's not like that on TV." At that point, the whole panel exchanged glances, and I told her the interview was over. I thanked her for coming and offered to shake her hand. Instead, she held my hand with both of hers and started begging for another chance, saying she really needed the job. I reminded her again, if she couldn't handle a simple task like this, we couldn't consider her for a role that involved much more difficult scenes. She left. About 2 weeks later, she got the standard "thanks, but we've chosen another candidate" letter from HR. She called and got transferred to me. She asked why she didn't get hired, so I reminded her what had happened during the interview, how she herself said she couldn't do the job. Then she told me she had changed. She said she binge-watched Forensic Files, and now she was ready. Story 20. I used to manage a really busy and popular restaurant in town. We didn't hire based on looks, but most of our team were young university students, and we rarely had anyone over 25 apply. One day, I was working a pretty smooth shift. We were busy but handling it well, so I spent time helping run food, clean tables, and check on guests. Right in the middle of our busiest time, an older woman walked in. Her clothes were very dirty, and she asked to speak with a manager. I told her that I was the manager. I was 24 at the time. She gave me a strange, almost annoyed look, like she was shocked someone my age was in charge. Her timing was already off. Anyone with restaurant experience knows not to walk in during peak hours to ask for a job, but I stayed polite. I said, "Here's an application. You can sit at that first booth, and I'll come talk with you in a few minutes." While she was filling out the form, I ran food to a table. I delivered 4 plates and left one under the warmer to come back for. When I returned to grab the last plate, she was standing there and said, "Just so you know, this food has been sitting out way too long. That's not acceptable." Me, "Thanks for your concern, but that's not the case." "Excuse me. I've done every job in this industry, and I'm telling you this isn't okay." Me, "Well, you don't work here, so it's not really up to you." Rolls her eyes, "You need to get your team, and everything else, under control." Me, turns to walk away, noted. Then she called out, "Wait, aren't you going to go over my application with me?" I was honestly stunned. I said, "No, definitely not." She asked, "Why not?" I said, "Let me give you a few quick tips. Since you say you've worked in this industry for years, I'm sure you know this already. But just in case, walking into an interview with a rude attitude is not okay. Insulting the person doing the hiring is not okay. Using disrespectful language? Also not okay. I won't be interviewing you. Instead, I'm asking you to leave." She gave me a harsh look and stormed out, saying, "This is nonsense." Definitely one of the strangest things I've dealt with on the job. Story 21. I was a manager at an electronics store, and we were doing interviews for a sales position. A young man came in for his interview. He was tall, but not really muscular or anything. He sat down with his legs spread out and elbows resting on his knees. While I asked him a few questions, he didn't make much eye contact, which already gave me a strange feeling. Then I asked him, "How well do you work with people?" His answer, "I used to be a bouncer. I know how to deal with people." That was it for me. I immediately said, "Okay, this interview is over. Thank you for your time." Story 22. I was hiring senior software engineers and ended up doing a group phone interview with one candidate who had a very unique way of thinking. He had to write everything down on paper first. Every time I asked him a technical question, there would be a long pause, and you could clearly hear the sound of fast scribbling on paper while he worked through the answer. That alone wasn't a problem. I've worked with many unique personalities before. As long as they can get the job done, it's usually fine. The issue came when he tried to explain his answers. He kept holding up his paper drawings to the phone and asking if what he had drawn solved the problem. This was not a video call, just audio. When we told him we couldn't see anything he was holding up, he went back to scribbling. Then repeated the same thing several more times, asking again if his drawing made sense. It was clear he wasn't fully grasping the situation, and unfortunately, we decided not to move forward. A somewhat related moment. I also had someone on a team I took over who never answered their work phone. One day, I stopped by their desk to check if it was broken. They told me the phone had started ringing recently, something it hadn't done in over 6 years, and since that seemed odd, they thought it was broken and just unplugged it. Story 23. This one's pretty mild compared to some others, but here's my story. I was a hiring manager at a fast food restaurant. We were really short on staff, so my district manager told me to hire the next person who came in, as long as there were no major red flags. I spent about 5 minutes asking this guy different questions, just trying to spot any concerns. He seemed okay, so I told him we could start the paperwork and he could do his 2-hour orientation right away, then start work on Monday. He said no because he had another interview at Subway. So I asked, "Then why are you here?" He replied, "Because my mom said I need to get a job, but I don't really want to." Fast forward to the next day. He calls and says he'll take the job. Apparently, his mom found out he turned it down and got upset, so she made him call back and accept. The store manager ended up hiring him. I called her to explain how the interview went, but she hired him anyway. He lasted 3 days. For the record, she never listens when I recommend not hiring someone. Story 24. I used to help run interviews for a competitive student leadership group at my university. We had the usual questions, things like why the person wanted to join and what they could bring to the organization. At the end of each interview, we'd include a fun question just to lighten the mood and see how candidates responded in a more relaxed way. One of our go-to questions was, if a penguin wearing a sombrero walked into the room right now, why is it here and what would it say? Most people would laugh and say something silly like, "It's here for a party," or "He wants tacos." Light, fun answers. But one candidate took it in a totally different direction. She launched into a long explanation about how she would think it was part of an elaborate plan by her mom to spy on her, because she had trust issues with her parents. Then she spent around 10 minutes explaining her relationship with her parents, how they didn't get along, and how she felt like she was letting them down. It got really personal, really fast. She didn't get an offer. Story 25. I'm a bit late to this, but I once interviewed a guy who looked perfect on paper. His phone interview went great, and his references all said really positive things. Then came the in-person interview. He spent nearly an hour talking about his spiritual experiences. He described how he often felt like he left his body and could see peaceful beings wherever he went. He said he could tell me my life's purpose. Apparently, there are 3, and that he could help me experience a better way of living. He also claimed to be very smart and said he was taught by private tutors hired by his wealthy family. I was pretty surprised and ended the interview as politely and quickly as I could. Later, I searched his name online and found out the part about the rich family was true, but I also came across some unusual blog posts he had written. The most concerning part was his current job. He was caring for an older woman who, according to him, was very fond of him and believed in his ability to help her feel better. Her children didn't seem to approve, but she was giving him free housing and paying him. Story 26. A friend of mine was a hiring manager for an online homeschooling platform that focused on general, non-religious education. Most of the students were kids who couldn't go to regular school due to health issues. I happened to overhear one of her interviews. When asked what subjects she wanted to teach, the woman said she wanted to teach behind-the-wheel driving and also lessons about her personal faith to help kids connect spiritually before their time came. Yes, she really said that. My friend explained kindly that the program only allowed history-based discussions of religion, not faith-based teaching. The woman insisted that she was given a mission to guide the kids spiritually. Again, she repeated that. So my friend gently shifted the topic and reminded her this was an online job, and teaching driving over the internet wouldn't be possible. At that point, the woman seemed shocked. She hadn't realized it was a remote job. She got upset and said her subjects wouldn't work online. She needed to be in the same room as the students. My friend, still calm, said the company had no plans to change how they teach. The woman got more upset and demanded to speak with a manager, without realizing my friend was the manager. So the call went to her boss. 10 minutes later, her boss walked in, gave her a look, and said, "Next time someone like that calls, just tell them I'm not available and that you're in charge." Story 27. I wasn't the hiring manager, but my friend was doing interviews for an online wedding invitation company. He had a question he liked to ask every candidate. Teach me something in 60 seconds. It wasn't really about what they taught. He just wanted to see how they handled a surprise. Most people would explain something about photography or graphic design, but one candidate gave a very unexpected answer. She said she could make a funny noise using just her eye. Then she spent the next 60 seconds trying to show how she could do it. But nothing happened. She couldn't actually do it. The rest of the interview was really awkward. After that, my friend decided not to ask that question anymore during interviews. Story 28. I was hiring for the art department on a film project. The interview started normally, but then the woman began speaking in a strange voice, kind of like a bad impression of a movie character. It was very awkward. She stayed in character for about 5 minutes, and I had no idea what was going on. Eventually, She admitted she didn't actually want to work in the art department. She was trying to use the job interview to get into acting, which was her real dream. I politely told her the position was only for behind-the-scenes work. She then said she didn't have any art samples to show me and asked if I could help her get an audition with someone. I tried to explain again that I couldn't help with that. She didn't leave right away, so there was a weird pause, some awkward small talk, and then finally she said she'd go. Honestly, I never figured out when she was acting and when she was being herself. I still don't know what her real voice sounds like. The whole thing felt like a comedy skit gone wrong, like something off an old kids' TV show. She emailed me twice afterward, once asking for any acting opportunities, and again saying she'd be okay with a regular crew job. I didn't reply to either message. Story 29. Wow, I'm really glad I already have a job, because if I didn't, reading this thread would make me feel hopeless. Some of the expectations people have for workers here are just too much. I interviewed a college student who didn't have any work experience. What a disappointment. I say I only hire honest people, but when someone told me they were let go from their last job, I didn't pick them. You want a job to earn money for rent and food? Sorry, I only hire people with a true passion for paperwork, data entry, or stocking shelves. But also, if someone pretends to be passionate just to get the job, I won't hire them either. One person said their hobby was looking through trash, something that's totally legal, but I called the police anyway because I thought it was weird. I didn't hire someone because they didn't know where to return their visitor badge and looked nervous when they couldn't find anyone to ask. One person asked how the company was doing financially because their last 4 jobs shut down. I thought that question was totally out of line. I was hiring for a tech job but didn't go with the guy because he seemed socially awkward. No place for that in IT, right? Story 30. Oh man, this one was wild. We had a guy come in for a job interview. He was a big guy, dressed pretty casually, just jeans and a t-shirt. I brought him into the conference room to wait for someone else to do the interview. A minute or two later, another person walked in from the same car. He was really short, with red hair, and looked a bit messy, like he hadn't cleaned up much. He walked straight to the water fountain, took a drink, and then my coworker and I gave each other a look like, "What is going on?" Then this short guy walked right into the conference room where the interviewee was sitting, closed the door, and sat down next to him like he belonged there. He even started watching videos on his phone while they just hung out. Turns out the short guy was his driver, even though the guy we were interviewing said he had a license and a car of his own. We politely asked the driver to wait outside, then did the interview as normal. The interviewee didn't get the job. I mean, who brings a friend into their interview and thinks that's okay? Side note, another employee said they went to high school with the driver and that he once took a bunch of collectible cards from them back in the day. Story 31. We had a few unforgettable interviews over the years. One time, a man came in for a job. He was a bit older, with some gray in his hair, but still definitely able to work. I usually try to keep interviews conversational, just to get to know the person better. But this guy only wanted to talk about one thing, his collection of tools and gear. Every time he answered a work-related question, he'd add something like, "Yeah, and I've got gear. Lots of it." Eventually, he even asked if I wanted to come see them, in his van, right there in the parking lot. I'm someone who supports personal freedom and responsibility, but yeah, we didn't move forward with that candidate. Then there was another guy who handed me his business card during the interview. The card had American and Mexican flags, lightning bolts, dollar signs, flashing lights, and photos of people dancing in party clothes. In the background was a photo of himself as a DJ, spinning music, with big gold letters saying, "DJ for Hire Super Fantastico." He didn't get the job, but I still have that card in my wallet to this day. It always makes me smile when I see it. One of my coworkers, a female interviewer, once had a candidate drop something on the floor during their chat. She pointed to it and asked, "What's that?" His response was totally inappropriate and unprofessional. She ended the interview right then. And of course, there were the overly confident ones. If you ever want to ruin your chances at a job, just act like you already have it. I've had candidates who seemed qualified, but the way they talked down to me or treated the interview like a waste of time made me pass. No one wants to hire someone who acts like meeting their future manager is beneath them. Story 32. I was hiring for a beginner-level cable technician job in a rural area where we didn't have many people applying. Another tech supervisor had already filled his last open spot, but he sent me one more applicant and said, "He seems like a hard worker." I went to the local office and found a quiet place for the interview. I told the receptionist to let me know when the candidate showed up. A few minutes later, she came back and said, "Please tell me this guy won't be working directly with customers." That was my first warning. His resume was very basic, but since this was an entry-level job, I didn't worry too much. His only work experience was on his family's farm and one season at a ski resort. Since I'm from a farming state, I know farm work can be tough, so I didn't judge his limited background. He showed up wearing jeans and a collared shirt, which was fine for the job. I asked him about his work on the farm and what he usually did. He gave a 3-word answer. "I pick rocks." I waited to see if he'd explain more, but he didn't, so I asked what that meant exactly. He said his job was to walk beside the equipment and remove large rocks that got uncovered. I asked, "Okay, what else did you do?" He replied, "Just the rocks." His short answers and serious expression made the conversation difficult. Trying to keep things going, I asked what he liked most about the job since he'd been doing it for years. He looked off to the side like he was really thinking hard, but didn't seem to come up with anything. So I said, "No worries. Some people find it easier to remember what they didn't like." "What was your least favorite part?" Without missing a beat, he said, "Pickin' rocks." Story 33. One guy applied for a job in quality control, QC, because he said he had lots of ideas to improve things. But instead of small changes, like organizing ingredients to make mixing easier, his ideas were way off. He suggested that we stop making frozen cookie dough and start making baked pretzel bites instead. The problem? We didn't even have full-sized ovens at the plant, just small ones in the lab for testing. I explained again what the QC job actually was, mostly writing things down, checking that everything follows the process, and sometimes suggesting small improvements. But the big decisions, like what products we make, come from the company that owns the plant. We don't just switch from making 250,000 pounds of cookies a day to pretzels because someone likes pretzels. He didn't really understand what the job was. Another applicant was a former college professor with a PhD in physics. He had worked at one of the biggest medical device companies in the state. He got hired through a temp agency to pack boxes, and when he did a good job, they offered him a full-time position doing the same thing. He told me he wanted to move into QC to try climbing the career ladder from the ground up. I told him honestly that it wasn't a great move. The QC job was more work, a little more pay, but wouldn't help much with his long-term goals. I suggested other paths, like moving into shipping and later applying for a higher role in logistics, since he was great with numbers, or going into maintenance, which could lead to regional or national roles, especially with his background in building complex equipment. But he wasn't interested in using his degrees, which I found strange. We ended up getting sidetracked and talked about our shared interest in physics, and even brainstormed a way to detect bacteria using light. But in the end, his career detour didn't last long. A few months later, he was still working night shifts, packing cookies and washing equipment for $14 an hour, with full benefits. Story 34. This might not be the most dramatic story, but I still think it's pretty funny. I wasn't the hiring manager, just someone working in the office where we were looking to hire a new team member. One day, a guy showed up for his interview, an hour early. I figured, okay, he's probably just nervous and wants to be prepared. No big deal. We offered him some water or something to drink, but he said no. Then he just sat down and stared at the wall for about 45 minutes. It was a little strange, but whatever. My manager eventually rearranged some things and managed to interview him early. It must have gone all right, because they invited him back for a second interview. Now here's where it gets weirder. For the second interview, he showed up 2 hours early. Again, he just wanted to sit there in our busy office, quietly staring at the wall. Eventually, we started feeling awkward and gently suggested he go grab a coffee from the cafe downstairs. It took some convincing, but about an hour after he arrived, and still an hour before his interview, he finally went down to get a coffee. He never came back. This was a high-paying position, and the guy just disappeared. Gone. No message, no follow-up, nothing. What always gets me is trying to figure out what he was thinking. Did he decide waiting another hour wasn't worth it? Did he change his mind and go home? Or, and this always makes us laugh, did he somehow get lost and is still wandering the building, trying to find his way back to the interview room? Story 35. I used to do interviews at Home Depot. One day, someone came in, and the very first thing they did was demand to know why they didn't get hired the last time they applied. I had no idea. I wasn't even at that store when it happened. I told him, "I'm not sure what went wrong. Maybe the interview didn't go well. But you've been given another chance, so let's see how this one goes." Unfortunately, he didn't do any better this time. He spent the whole interview complaining about not being hired before. He rolled his eyes at every question and answered, "I don't know," to nearly everything. As it happened, the district manager was visiting the store that day. I made sure to speak with him afterward and asked that this candidate not be called in again for future interviews. Story 36. I work at a small branch of a larger company. Each location handles its own hiring, and usually 2 managers run the interview process. We're a child care center. While our director was out on maternity leave, I was left in charge of pretty much everything, including hiring. One day, a woman asked to come in for a pre-interview, which isn't unusual since our job application can be a bit confusing. Another employee let her into the secure building and came to get me so I could start the interview. I always begin the same way. "Why do you want to work with children?" Her answer caught me off guard. She said she had lots of experience, but child care wasn't her first choice anymore, and she would accept any job we offered her, even if she was already working here. She had only been in the building for about 5 minutes. I tried to end the interview early, but she kept talking. She said she only wanted to work with infants because seeing teachers give up on older children was too hard for her emotionally. She said it broke her heart, and she didn't want to get attached to kids who were, in her words, already struggling. Then she asked why I was doing the interview and not my boss. I explained that my boss was on maternity leave, and until she returned, I was in charge. She immediately asked if my boss would be enrolling her own child again once she came back. I said yes, her little one and older child too. We all know and care about her kids. The woman rolled her eyes and said something like, "It never works out for me when the boss's kid is involved." Finally, her lunch break was over and she had to leave. She promised she would apply officially that afternoon. Before she even made it back to submit her application, I was already contacting our regional office to recommend we not move forward with her. Then the staff member who had let her in told me something else. When they said they were going to get me for the interview, the woman complained that we shared the same first name and said that a loan would be a problem for her. From start to finish, the whole experience was a mess. Story 37. I was hiring for a product marketing lead at a major company, one of the biggest in the world. The role was tied to a $7 billion product group and was a pretty big deal. A colleague referred someone they called a top performer from their network. So we set up the interview. A few minutes in, the candidate leans his chair back and puts his feet up on my desk, like he's in a movie or something. I kept a straight face and continued asking open-ended questions. His answers were all some version of, "I'm great. When do I start?" I wrapped things up and thanked him for his time, adding, "Thanks for showing me a new kind of office workout, chair yoga." He laughed, clearly thinking I was serious. He didn't catch the sarcasm. I quickly removed him from the list of candidates and told our recruiting team not to move forward. Another part of the company eventually hired him for a much less important role. Big companies sometimes have the room to carry folks like that. At least he said, "Thank you," at the end of the interview. Just kidding, he didn't. Good luck out there, my overly confident friend. Story 38. Back when I was in my early 20s, a group of us went out to eat at a Greek restaurant. One of my friends, who's Greek himself, was going through a rough patch and didn't have a job at the time. Sadly, the food and service were both really bad, and he was frustrated because he felt like the little money he had was completely wasted. He got up and went to speak with the manager. He was clearly upset and started raising his voice, saying things like, "You can't treat your customers this way. This is not how a business should be run." He even said his meal, I forget exactly what it was, tasted like it had just been microwaved. That's when the owner of the restaurant came out to see what was going on. After hearing what had happened, the owner let the manager go right then and there. She had treated my friend really poorly, and it showed. Then something none of us expected happened. The owner actually offered my friend a job on the spot. It's been almost 20 years now, and he's still working there. It's not a fancy job, but he never went to college, so it's worked out well for him. Story 39. Where do I even begin? We once had someone use the fake tree in our lobby as a bathroom. while waiting for his interview. One person listed Microsoft Excel as a skill on their resume, but when it came time for the test, they got a 0%. Not even exaggerating, they didn't know how to close the program. You don't need to be an expert, just don't put it on your resume if you've never used it. Another candidate uploaded a link to their resume, and when I clicked it during the interview, it took me to a very inappropriate website. Definitely not a resume. Speaking of resumes, I once received one that wasn't even a resume. It was a long message about how excited they were to be expecting a baby, how they hoped it would be a girl, and how they missed their partner who was at a friend's house. It ended with a message to a higher power asking for their partner to come home soon. It had nothing to do with work or job experience. During one interview, a candidate, a white male, said, "I'm scared of white people because my grandfather had a bad experience with one. I won't even ride the bus." I didn't know how to respond to that one. Most recently, I interviewed someone who said a lot of strange things like, "I'm probably one of the most knowledgeable people you've ever interviewed, right? And that reference is actually my brother. Please don't call him. I haven't told my parents I'm changing careers yet. Also, you don't get many smart and experienced people like me in here, huh?" She also did some very odd things. She licked her hand, rubbed it on her shoe, then licked it again multiple times. She blew her nose and was licking her fingers shortly after. As we finished, she asked to use the restroom and said, "Is it clean? Like, do you use this one?" I told her it should be fine, and she said, "Good. I'm kind of a germaphobe." A few minutes later, she came back to my desk to ask more questions. I walked her out again, and then she reached out to shake my hand, even though she had been licking that same hand throughout the whole interview, and had just said she was afraid of germs. These are just a few of the moments that stand out the most. Story 40. This isn't about me. It's about a co-worker who made a really bad call. I used to work at Trader Joe's for several years. At one point, we were looking to hire a few new team members, and we got a great-looking resume from a 21-year-old college student. She showed up early for her interview, which was a great start. My co-worker and I sat down to speak with her. She walked into the room, and honestly, she was stunning. But of course, we kept things professional. She told us she was going to the local university, and that Trader Joe's was a perfect fit because of the flexible schedule and how close the store was to campus. She had also worked in her parents' small grocery store during high school, so she already knew a lot about the job. But what really stood out? She was funny, smart, and incredibly kind. It was like talking to a stand-up comedian, charming and quick-witted, but never over the top. She even started talking about product placement and how sample stations and end cap displays affect sales. I was 25 at the time, and honestly, I was amazed. She was the total package. After she left, I turned to my co-worker, who was about 50, and said, "Well, I guess we can cancel the rest of the interviews." But he replied, "Oh no, we can't hire her." I was completely confused. She seemed like the ideal employee. Then he said, "We can't hire someone who looks like that. It causes problems in the workplace." I couldn't believe it. She was qualified, thoughtful, experienced, and had a great attitude. And yet, she didn't get the job, for a reason that had absolutely nothing to do with her skills. Still one of the most frustrating and disappointing hiring decisions I've ever seen. Story 41. I wasn't a manager, but I definitely had a what just happened kind of moment during a job interview. About 5 years ago, I went to interview at a local bar and brewery near my house. It was early in the day, not long after they had opened for lunch. I told the host I was there for an interview, and she said she'd go get the hiring manager. So I waited at the front. I stood there for about 10 minutes, and then I heard shouting coming from the back, like a full-on argument. Then I heard pans clanging and being tossed around. This yelling match went on for a few more minutes until a guy in a cook's uniform stormed out, clearly angry. From the back, someone shouted, "And don't bother coming back." A few moments later, the host came back looking pretty nervous and said, "Sorry, he'll be out in a couple minutes." Normally, I probably would have walked out then and there, but I really needed a job at the time, so I stayed. Finally, the manager, who I found out was also the owner of the bar chain, came out and sat down with me for the interview. The conversation went okay, but the entire time, all I could think about was how he was clearly one of the people screaming in the back just a few minutes earlier. He said I'd get a call back, but I never did. I ended up getting hired at Applebee's instead, and honestly looking back, I'm glad I didn't get that first job. Story 42. I was interviewing candidates for a mid-level app developer role. I'm a guy, and at the time I was around 36 to 38 years old. One of our final candidates was a young woman just a couple years out of college. She had to fly in from another city to attend the interviews, which were spread across 3 different office buildings in our area. They were too far apart to walk, and the schedule was pretty tight. So, I ended up driving her around in my nearly new car to help her stay on time. She did a great job in the interviews, very smart, confident, and clearly a great fit for the team. After the last meeting, I was taking her back to the main office so she could arrange transportation to her hotel. That's when things suddenly felt different. She started shaking, looked close to tears, and softly kept saying sorry, almost like a scared child. I was really confused because everything had gone so well. She then asked if I could take her straight to her hotel instead, which I did. At the door, we exchanged a few polite words, but she still looked like she was having a really rough day. Later, when I got back to the office and was grabbing my things from the car, I noticed something on the passenger seat. There was a large stain. At first glance, I honestly thought someone had spilled something serious or gotten hurt. Then I realized she had likely experienced a personal accident related to her monthly cycle. It must have been incredibly embarrassing for her. Earlier, I had noticed she had changed clothes and covered the seat with a sweater at some point, so it all made sense in hindsight. I rushed home, used the right cleaning supplies, and luckily everything came out perfectly. Looking back, it must have been an overwhelming day for her, traveling, back-to-back interviews, and then that unexpected situation. Anyone would have been stressed. That evening, I called my boss and we held a quick team call. I said, "I'd like to do a few more reference checks, but if they're solid, she's our top choice." Some teammates had rated her slightly higher than others, but everyone agreed she was the strongest overall. We offered her the job, and she accepted. She turned out to be fantastic, smart, reliable, and a great team member. I never mentioned the incident to anyone except my wife, who at first jokingly asked if I was hiding a crime because of the mess I was cleaning in the car. Story 43. Here's one from the other side of the table. It happened about 12 years ago when I was living in the UK. I was applying for a design job at a lighting company. The role was mainly graphic design and layout work for their product catalog. I was going through a recruitment agency, and they were the ones who put my name forward for the job. When the recruiter described the company, they said something odd like, "It's a family-run business. You might even get extra days off for holidays." A strange way to try and sell the job, honestly. When I got to the office, the first thing I noticed was how disorganized the place was. There were piles of old boxes stacked too high, and the workspace felt way too crowded. Not exactly a safe or comfortable environment. The interview was with a father and son who ran the company. The son was great. He had looked over my resume, checked out my portfolio, and asked solid questions about my work. The father, he fell asleep during the interview. He wasn't snoring, but he clearly drifted off for a bit. It was really distracting and just felt unprofessional. After the interview, the recruiter called to tell me they offered me the job. I mentioned that one of the interviewers had fallen asleep during the interview, and the recruiter responded with, "Oh no, not again." Safe to say, I didn't take the job. Story 44. I've got a story from the other side of the job interview process. A few years ago, I heard that a local adult store was hiring, so I decided to apply. They invited me in for an interview and told me to go to the office upstairs from the shop. The building was old, and to get to the office, I had to go up a narrow, dimly lit staircase that led to a single door. When I walked in, I saw what they called the office. I'm about 190 centimeters tall, around 6 feet 5 inches, and the ceiling must have been 180 centimeters or less. So I had to crouch to stand. It was dark, no windows, and the only light came from a small desk lamp. The desk was buried under stacks of papers, some catalogs, invoices, and even printed login info for their email and server. It felt like something straight out of a strange novel. Behind the desk sat a heavy-set man who didn't seem very interested. He began with the usual questions, what experience I had, why I applied, but then things got odd. He started asking about my family and suddenly focused only on my mother. Her age, what she did, what she looked like, and so on. I was young at the time and didn't really know how a job interview was supposed to go, so I just sat there, quiet, confused, and unsure what to say. In the end, I didn't get the job.